Hey guys, welcome back. This week's Midnight Movie, we are continuing on with the retrospective of the great films of the legendary John Carpenter. And this week is a real treat because we're hitting kind of a milestone in terms of where Carpenter was in his career. We started with 1975's Assault on Precinct 13, and we just finished Escape from New York from 1981. Of course, in between there, we had Halloween and we had The Fog. Really, at this point, Carpenter is just kind of a rock star. He has done several genre films up to this point, all of which kind of set the tone and archetypes for what those genre would become. We wouldn't have the slasher as we know it today without Halloween and Michael Myers. We would not have the sort of apocalyptic anti-hero without Escape from New York and the great Snake Plissken, played by Kurt Russell. And so we are arriving in 1982 with John Carpenter's The Thing. This movie is not one I necessarily grew up with, like I grew up with Halloween and The Fog and others. This was a movie that, I saw clips and bits and pieces of it as a kid and just ran out of the room. This movie is a masterpiece, not just of science fiction, of horror. It's a masterpiece of incredible practical effects by the great Rob Bottin. And it's really effective. It still is. I literally just rewatched this movie yesterday just to be prepared for today. And man, it holds up. It really, really does. And again, I was a pretty bold kid. And I could watch Friday the 13th. I could watch Nightmare on Elm Street. I could watch all of these, kind of quasi-graphic violent horror movies. But The Thing was one I really did not get the courage to watch in its entirety until I was in, my late teens, I think. And, it's not just the direction and the cinematography, which are all great. Obviously, Carpenter is a master of directing the darker horror feel, dark science fiction. But you also have great Dean Cundey, who's one of my favorite cinematographers on this. A great script by Bill Lancaster, who can't remember the other stuff he wrote. But then on top of that, this is the one of, I think it's maybe the only John Carpenter film in which Carpenter himself did not contribute to or fully compose the score. Because that was left to the incredible Ennio Morricone. Ennio Morricone, you guys may know from the great spaghetti westerns of the 60s, who would continue to work through the 70s and so forth. And I believe, oh no, he passed away in 2020 at 91. But the guy was prolific. Ennio Morricone really absolutely nails the dread and the isolation with his score in this film. And again, much like Carpenter, I can't imagine this film without his score. I'm going to try not to spoil anything for those of you that have not seen this film, and I can't imagine who hasn't. If you're watching this video, you probably are a fan of this movie. This is one of the most reviewed movies, I think, on the web, certainly on YouTube. So I'm sure I'm not going to tell you things you guys don't already know. But one of the things that I think is most surprising, because this movie now, if you know it, is so well regarded as just an absolute masterpiece. It's so well done. It's, again, like all of Carpenter's films, it's so fun. It's just fun. This is something that you could program anytime, and, your friends are just down to watch. It was one of those movies, through my 20s, that anytime it came on, I'm like, okay, I'm stopping whatever I'm doing. I'm sitting down. I'm going to watch it. This is the type of movie that makes you change your plans for the day because it's so damn good. It's so atmospheric. It's so effective. But crazily enough, this movie bombed at the box office, which, it's like when you learn that Blade Runner bombed at the box office, that these two incredible masterpiece films of their genres somehow didn't do well, which just seems unthinkable. But, these are films from a day before the internet, before fans and people that enjoy these films had a voice in terms of, no, this is a great film. This was a day when newspaper columnists and the sneak previews with Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel kind of ruled the roost. And if they didn't like your film, it could really have a negative impact. Of course, over time, many of these directors would be vindicated. People like William Friedkin with his film Sorcerer, which is another incredible masterpiece, was just pushed aside because I believe it came out the same week as a little film called Star Wars. The Thing, I believe, came out a week or two after a film called E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial. And yeah, I guess, we were full, we had started the 80s, and the 80s really was kind of a shift in film in which things got more aspirational, got more optimistic, which I love, which is great. I don't think you have to choose between one or the other. You can have gritty, realistic, sometimes downbeat films from the 70s, and you can also have Ghostbusters and Back to the Future. You can have both, but our industry is one that it's, once one thing gets hot, that's all we're going to do because, we can only do what worked last year and what made money and so on. But yes, The Thing was panned. The fans of the original The Thing, because this is a remake of the 1950s film, hated it as well because Carpenter and Bottin and company really pushed the envelope with these incredible special effects. Like I said, I just watched this again yesterday, and it just looks so damn real. It really does. It's incredible effects and just the art of editing. One of the things that I've learned I'm in the process of completing a few cuts of my first film project. I understood it intellectually, but I really understand it now, the art of editing. That you can shoot the most incredible footage, but if you don't have a firm idea of how you want it cut, and you are working with people who understand that, man, it can make or break a film. There's actually several great films out there that I watch, I'm like, man, if they just had done a few extra cuts, this would have been a much better film. The Thing doesn't suffer from that. The Thing is, I think, technically one of Carpenter's most perfect films. And this is, again, at least from 75 to about the early to mid 90s, I think, in my opinion, Carpenter could do no wrong, but he really tops himself with the two movies, I think. The Thing and Big Trouble in Little China from 1986, which everyone kind of forgets about because it's not a horror sci-fi, but it's another great collaboration he did with Kurt Russell. Perfect. The Thing, plot-wise, is kind of perfect. Carpenter's really good at sort of doing siege films where people are kind of holed up. This is that whole Rio Bravo influence that so deeply impacted him in his work, and you can see that in Assault on Precinct 13, which is a siege film. You have Halloween isn't quite a siege film, but it is, I guess, towards the end. Your people are holed up, people are facing a force that's so much stronger than them. The Fog, it becomes a siege film where these people are sort of holed up in this town, surrounded by this sinister fog. Obviously, Escape from New York kind of gets there. Escape from New York is very much a futuristic Western. I feel like that's the most Western that Carpenter ever kind of did. But then we get to The Thing. A group of people holed up, just like Assault, just kind of like Rio Bravo. These films that bring the danger to you and put you in a situation where you really have to think on your feet. Another beautiful thing about The Thing is that you don't know who is the thing. These group of guys that are at a U.S. Antarctica research facility encounter this what looks like a crazy Norwegian dude going after a dog, a sled dog. This is at the top of the film, and he's got a rifle and he's firing at the dog. They don't quite see what's going on. He lands his helicopter. He's coming at the dog that has now taken refuge kind of around these guys, Kurt Russell and T.K. Carter and Keith David and Wilford Brimley. And he raises his rifle. Of course, he's trying to shoot the dog. They don't know that, and they shoot and kill him instead. So nobody knows what's going on because they don't speak Norwegian, and the Norwegian guy wasn't speaking English to them. And so now we have this thing in the shape of a dog in this camp. I'll try not to say more than that. I'm not really spoiling anything for you if you haven't seen this movie. And from there, we get what I can only describe as maybe one of the more perfect sort of paranoia films. You know, for as incredible as the special effects are in this movie, and they really are. Like there's several scenes that I won't ruin that occur at this base, at this research center, that it's like, oh, he really went there. You know, there's a moment back in Assault on Precinct 13 that the censors wanted Carpenter to cut because it's a pretty brutal shot, literally. And he ended up not taking it out. You know, he cut out a few other things, kept that in, and it makes the violence and the stakes of that movie so much stronger. He does the exact same thing in The Thing, and I was kind of surprised that some of these things got left in, but I'm glad they were. They were. It would not have had the punch that it does. The other thing about this film that I'm seeing now that I don't know that I ever recognized prior is this is such a guy's movie. This is a dude's movie. It's all men at this facility at the end of the earth in Antarctica, this unforgiving, frozen wasteland. And you just see guys just doing their work and hanging out. There's a scene where they're in the game room. You got a few of the guys playing poker. You got one guy like reading a book off on the couch. A couple guys are playing pool. Someone's playing computer chess. And it was one of those things where I realized, man, when was the last time you saw a bunch of guys doing that? We're all on our phones today. And it was so refreshing to kind of see that. But more importantly, as we see all of these different types of guys in this movie. You know, everybody's kind of bearded. Everybody's just kind of quasi-stoic. There's a little bit of sort of, you know, male humor that's injected into this movie that really balances it nicely against the intensity of the situation, the stakes of the movie. And I can't remember the last time I saw a film like that. Outside of, I just watched John Wick Chapter 4. I would say the torchbearer for healthy, grounded masculinity in films right now has got to be the John Wick franchise. You know, outside of that, I don't know. And again, you know, I think that there needs to be a spectrum of life and characters and archetypes represented. In no way am I anti-female character in articulating what I'm articulating here, but simply that it just seems more rare to see that sort of masculinity reflected in a film like it is in The Thing. You know, you have the guys that are more grunts. You've got the guys that are more run by their emotion. You have the guys that are run more by their intellect. You have the guys that are just running out the clock and just trying to just get through a day. And it's just a fun character study, this movie. It feels so much more real because nobody is overplaying their character. Whatever these guys did, they did an excellent job of transmitting in their performance guys that I've known in my life. And that makes it so much more real. And it hits a lot harder when stuff starts to go sideways and gets really crazy. So much incredible use of framing of shadow. Because again, you are at the end of the earth, you're in Antarctica, and you know it gets dark and cold. The sound design, along with Morricone's score, is just oof, it gets under your skin. I think maybe more than a lot of sci-fi horrors, just the effectiveness of Morricone's score, like again other John Carpenter films. If you take that out, I don't know if this movie, um, if this makes sense, if the visuals, the framing, the composition, the lighting, the use of shadow, with that sound, just sort of puts this beautiful sort of filter over all of that and just pulls it all together. Uh, when the credits were rolling at the end, you know, that main theme plays, and I kind of had to turn it off. I'm like, okay, I'm good. You know, this is enjoy this movie because it sits like it's breathing like a creature, you know, right on your neck. But again, well done. They really nailed it. Again, the craziness of the story of this film, that it would innovate one, science fiction, because they don't spend a whole lot of time on the origin of the thing. They speculate things that you do get a little bit of insight into where it may have come from, just a little bit. They maintain the mystery of the monster, and that's another thing. Even though you do see it, it's very much the shark in Jaws and the werewolf in an American werewolf in London sort of approach, in that we know it's around, we'll see it here and there, but it's not overplayed. Now, when it does show up, there are some absolute bonkers, banana scenes that are excellent. So you do see the thing in different forms and guises, but we never see the definitive whatever it's supposed to be. So there is a mystery about this creature. We're not constantly talking about and speculating. One of the things we've gotten away from, I feel, in a lot of modern filmmaking, a lot of modern sci-fi and horror, is there's this desire to explain everything away. They started doing this with the character of Logan. We know him as Wolverine in Marvel Comics towards, I think, the early to mid 2000s. They tried to give him like a real name and an origin on the plains of Western Canada. And by that point, it was like, I don't want that. As much as I want an origin from Logan, it's Weapon X that was written and drawn by Barry Windsor Smith in the early 90s. Still don't know his name, and maybe it is Logan. Is that his first name? Is that his last name? I don't want to know more than that. Please let my characters have a mystery about them. It's so much more interesting. It's so much more compelling. And that's one thing that the thing gets right, is it has shapes, it has forms. We don't know why it does what it does. We just know that it does. We understand that this is a massive threat. It's also very scary because it can be anything or anyone. It's not always there. There's as much time spent on wondering, okay, where is it now? Who is it now? And so forth. Much like the brilliance of Jaws, where we don't see a ton of the shark up until the end, which made it just that much scarier, because for the entirety of that film, you're just wondering, how big is this thing? Man, it really is taking people down. Likewise, in American Werewolf in London, the brilliant John Landis, we get little bits. We might get like a tail or an ear, a tooth or an eye of the wolf, but we never get that big shot of the wolf, until the end. Again, if you haven't seen it, I'm not really spoiling anything for you. Allowing the audience to engage their imagination and to build, to fill in the what's quote unquote missing on the screen in their own minds, is greater theater of the mind than so many of these movies where, I won't name names, but there's a recent franchise that, they're really leveraging a lot from, and I've been, watching the recent films and even a TV series, and it's just too much at this point. For 30 years, they didn't really, they would do films for this franchise, and we get little installments here and there. Not all the backstory was filled out, so I could fill it in myself as a viewer, as a fan of the franchise, and it gave it sort of like this more esoteric, mysterious feel. Well, now they're filling everything in, and it's way too much. The last film, it was like whatever they had posited that they could do with the recent film in the writer's room, they just threw everything in the kitchen sink. And they've never done that in any other of the films of this franchise, and it ruined it for me. On top of the fact that they're casting these, you look at the cast of The Thing, you guys that have male pattern baldness, you got guys that are purposely shaving their head, you guys got beards, long hair, glasses. Some of them are fit, some of them are like dad bod. You don't see casts like this anymore. And then you look in, these more recent sci-fi horror films, and I won't name any specific ones, where literally everyone in the cast is 23 years old. The males and the females are interchangeable. Nobody has any features. Nobody has any characters. Nobody has any screen presence or stage presence, and it's just boring. We're casting Instagram filters as effing actors now, and it's so boring. And then this industry wonders why no one will go to the movies, why people are choosing to watch other stuff. One, the landscape is really fractured. I want to say competitive, but I don't know if it actually is competitive. I think there's a lot of good mainstream stuff done by studios that does come to the forefront. The John Wicks, there's a lot of the Conjuring franchise. These are all great, fun franchises and films that I think are solid. But those movies have real characters in them, mature adults with looks and their original noses, lines in their face, all of that. And unfortunately, there is this sort of like this wholesale leveling and sort of grounding down of any sort of edges or fine grounding down of edges and smoothing out of any sort of grit that has made a lot of film and television, frankly, boring and just, for me at least, unwatchable. The Thing satisfies that realism balanced against the fantasy of what's going on. These feel like real guys. These feel like real personalities. No one seems to be written in a way that is just a plot point, or they're just to serve the plot. I'm sure they were, but if that's what Bill Lancaster did, he could have fooled me, because all of these guys feel like real people in a real situation. You can see how you've known guys like these characters. You've known the Keith David character. You've known the Wilford Brimley character. You've known the Kurt Russell character, McCready, and the way they react to their situations. Okay, I've known guys like that, but that's exactly how they reacted. That's how they were, and it just settles the realism and grounds the film in such a beautiful way, so that when weird stuff starts happening, it just feels that much more real, even though it's clearly fantastic and science fiction. So this is a movie that, again, wild that it bombed at the box office, but this is another example of the brilliance of John Carpenter and just how he would be so vindicated over and over and over in his career. I know it seems like the guy had kind of a rough go of it because The Thing didn't do well. And, from what I've been able to piece together, Carpenter feels like he may have been punished, unfortunately, because this film didn't do well. After this, though, he would go on to direct Christine, which was a Stephen King adaptation, and that's another one of my favorite Carpenters. Talk about incredible mood, incredible style, aesthetic. It's so watchable. It's so beautifully shot. And then after that, he would do Starman. He proved to Hollywood that he's capable of more than just horror. Now, granted, it has a sci-fi bend to it, but it earned Jeff Bridges an Oscar nomination. So even though he's sort of within that sort of sci-fi world, that horror world, Carpenter was able to flex his muscles and show it's like, no, I'm not a one-trick pony. I can do many different things. I've got shades and gradation to my work and to my art. And so, yeah, over the years, this film would, again, I guess they call it a cult following. I think it's more than that, because there's nerds like me that love this film. I know tons of dudes that really like this film. Again, there's no time that I don't, program this for friends when we do, a movie night, that anyone's like, oh, man, this again? No. My guys that like movies that aren't film guys love it. The bang, pow, explosion guys, they love it. And so do, my fellow cinephiles, my movie guys that, will watch everything from French art house to American blockbusters and stuff like that. This movie, to capture all of that audience, those different types of audiences, again, speaks to just the brilliance of what Carpenter, Bottin, Cundy, what they did with this film. And it's just a freaking gem. So again, I shouldn't have to tell you guys this, but watch this movie. This is one of those movies you can really study. It's fun to watch this movie sometimes. I'm just wondering, okay, who's the thing next? Okay, wait, I think it was this guy. Okay, no, is it him? And one of the best parts, again, I won't spoil it if you haven't seen it. Again, where have you been? You gotta watch this movie. It's a very John Carpenter ending as well. This is, this is a time where, beginning with Halloween, Carpenter had really begun to play against audience expectations with the non-ending ending in his films, which would leave it open, which for me, growing up, being just like, oh my God, tell me there's a hidden 10 more minutes of this film where we can see what happens next. And yeah, it's he's brilliant. And, The Thing is no different in terms of how he resolves or doesn't resolve the film. And I remember the first time, my first real run through. Again, I was young. I was like 18 or 19, and just be like, oh, interesting resolution. So again, and then Carpenter would continue to do that, and very few people do that. But he's one of the few that's able to do it in a way that, like, okay, I know it. You're leaving me wanting more, and that's what I've always wanted with all of his films. The Thing, uh, is no different. I'm not sure if it's just urban legend, but there may have been ideas or possibility that there would be a sequel to this film. I don't know if that's actually true. What I do know is that this film, because I watched the Carpenter's commentary on this film with Kurt Russell, and apparently this concept of John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy is a real thing. I thought that was something that was created by fans, but he said no. That his Apocalypse trilogy is The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and then In the Mouth of Madness. So I guess it is a real thing. That's something that he coined, not something that fans decided to retrofit onto his work. I don't know if that means that he is claiming that there's a connection. I don't really see it. Maybe there is. All great fun films, but yeah, there's so much to love about this movie. Obviously, there's so much to love about all of Carpenter's work. Assuming you like these genre. If you don't, it's probably not for you because it's really intense. There's a lot going on in this movie, but treat yourself. This is one of those movies, again, like so many other Carpenter joints, that you'll return to more and more. It's a movie that just has so many layers to it, whether it be the characters, whether it be how the plot unfolds, how things, trying to guess the motivations of characters and so on. Uh, what would you do in this situation if you're holed up, at the end of the frickin' world, facing horrific weather conditions, and you don't know who to trust? Man, this is one of the most fun movies when you're done watching it, sitting back with your friends and discussing it, and picking it apart, and having your own sort of come to Jesus about how would you deal? What would you do? It's just pure fun. And that's the brilliance of this movie, that long after you're done watching it, it lives in your mind for days, weeks, months, years, and in my case, decades. So John Carpenter's The Thing, 1982. If you know what's good for you, check it out. Let me know. What do you think? Does this film hold up as well as I think it does? Is it as complex and as brilliant as I think it is? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.